For a young beverage company, getting onto the store shelves is only part of the challenge. The product also has to sell once it gets there. St. James Tea is trying to solve both problems at once by connecting its marketing directly to its product and retail strategies, from collaborations with hot culture properties to packaging innovation. How a young brand converts cultural relevance into commercial momentum is what we'll be discussing today with Brad Neumann, CEO of the 3-year-old beverage brand, on the Marketer's Brief, our weekly discussion of marketing news and trends that have the industry buzzing. Neumann co-founded St. James with former Arizona magnate John Ferralito, giving the independent company a direct lineage to one of the beverage industry's most distinctive and influential brands, and making St. James a closely watched potential next act. Neumann tells us how St. James differs from Arizona, why Costco has become a key sales channel, and how the company decides which cultural moments can generate lasting momentum. I'm John Springer, senior reporter at Ad Age, and this is the Marketer's Brief podcast. Brad Neumann, welcome to the Marketer's Brief podcast.
Thanks so much, John. Excited to be here.
So, Brad, you are a CEO of St. James Tea, which was founded along with John Ferralito, who had already helped to develop one of the country's biggest iced tea brands. What can you tell me that he saw in the market that convinced him to start again with St. James?
Yeah, I think what John has always been incredible at in his life is product market fit based on what the market needs at the current time, right? When he started Arizona over 30 years ago and built it to one of the largest privately owned, beverage companies in the world, he's kind of the guy who helped build the category, right? And at that time, the product that Arizona was a perfect fit. And I think fast forward to, 2022, 2023, when we first started St. James, it was again that recognition of what was going on in the market, right? Consumers focus on healthy, better for you products. The idea behind, for the first time in a long time, people really caring about what's in the product, making sure that it was sustainable, good for the environment, healthy all around, while still, checking the boxes for a great lifestyle beverage. And I think, John saw a huge opportunity to help create what we call the modern iced tea set. And it's, how lucky are we to have a guy that basically built the category, help us do it again.
It's a very different product, though, St. James in Arizona, right? You're at a different price point, you're in a different package, you're a little bit different lifestyle. How would you describe the differences between those brands?
Almost 100%, right? It's almost everything that Arizona isn't. So what makes St. James different is really what's in the bottle. So we bring in the highest quality organic tea leaves from the Assam region of India. Every one of our products are organic, low sugar, low calorie, all natural. We've got one line that has 4 grams of sugar or less, and then one line that has 0 sugar. And historically, iced teas are on average between 30 and 38 grams of sugar. So, we really wanted to focus on making a clean, high quality product, which we know and believe that we did with St. James. And then in terms of positioning, just like you said, we are a premium product relative to the set. We're a $2.99 product, not a 99-cent can. And what comes along with that is how we position the brand out in the market, through our collaborations, our events, our partnerships, meeting our consumers where they are. It's basically the complete opposite end of the spectrum, for what he saw in building Arizona.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll get into some of those collaborations in a minute. First, I wanted to kind of talk about the growth. The company showed 150% growth last year. I wonder if you could tell me sort of what constituted that and what evidence that you're seeing that consumer demand is kind of keeping pace with the expansion of the product, because you're still a pretty young brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're 3 years old. And I think, we've been very fortunate to grow as quickly and sustainably as we have to date. And, being in all these stores, I think what we're most excited about is seeing the success that we're having in multiple channels. And, when you look at our business in club, conventional, grocery, this product seems to work across all channels. And when we look at the data, obviously we're a very data-driven business. The most promising fact that we have is for the last about 18 months, we get a SPINS report with our sales data every 4 weeks. We haven't missed a single 4-week period in almost 2 years where we weren't the #1 fastest growing iced tea in the country. And that statistic is in both dollars and units. Sometimes with small brands, you see they grew 10,000% because they went from 5 stores to 100, right? We're talking about a much larger scale, and that triple digit growth has consistently replicated itself over the last 2.5 years, ever since we launched the brand. So our dollars and unit change are continuing to increase. Our rate of sale is continuing to increase, as well as obviously just growing doors and distribution. I think one of the most promising facts that we've had in our data is that we're in that number one spot, but we still have the lowest ACV out of all of our competitive brands and kind of the new modernized tea set. So we're in less than 17% of retail possible doors, yet we're still selling more within each of them. And that's what we're most excited about is, like I said, that multi-channel success.
Yeah, a couple of questions about channels now. I understand that you're entering Costco for the first time, right? What have you learned about the sort of the Costco shopper, and what kind of a strain or stress does it put on a young company to be able to kind of feed that beast?
So we've actually been in Costco for over a year and a half, but the way Costco works is each region will do its own separate rotation, right? So if you're lucky enough to get into one region of Costco, you typically get an 8-week rotation, and you hope that you hit your numbers and that they might give you another one next year. So the last year and a half, we've had a few one-off rotations. Right now is our first national program where we are available in every single warehouse across the US, which is an incredible opportunity. Costco is really unique in a couple of ways. Number one, I think it serves as a microcosm of the general market. I remember the first time that I had to do a roadshow at Costco where I'm pouring 5,000 samples a day and handing them out to people. One person walks up and says, "This is too sweet." One person walks up and says, "This could be sweeter." One person walks up and says, "Oh, I love sugar." So it's really learning a little bit more about the multitude of consumers, and while you can't make everyone happy, a lot of that product feedback is really, really important. The other thing that we look at Costco at is almost as an opportunity to sample the general market at great, great scale. So when you talk about the quantities of actual product and the volume that's going out, obviously there are efficiencies on the back end that help us, from a cost of goods and scaling our vendor relationships with our supply chain. But what it really comes down to is putting our product in front of millions and millions of people, and we kind of see a spillover effect happen. So, you go into Costco, you sell a few 100,000 cases, and then they see a single serve at Kroger, they see a bottle at, their local Albertsons, or they really like the flavor and now they want to try it and they buy it online. So while it's obviously a great volume generator, a revenue generator, we also see a lot of marketing impact from going into Costco rotations. And like I said, the one that we're in right now is the largest opportunity we've ever had with a full national program.
Okay, a smaller store, but Pepsi had mentioned this on their recent earnings call that they saw a slowdown in convenience channel for sales for both their snacks and their beverages. I think which they related to the gas prices and some of the effect on the consumer that way. I know that you can do a lot of things as a young brand to sort of market yourself and everything else, but what kind of opportunity do you have to sort of prepare for a unpredictable economy or a surging gas prices that's going to keep people out of an important channel like convenience?
So it's a really interesting point. And to be perfectly honest, for the first year and a half of launching this brand, we didn't even look at gas and convenience. And that was really notably because of our package. When we first launched St. James, it was in a Tetra Pak, a 16.9 ounce, cardboard box, if you want to call it. And that doesn't fit in a Glide, right? So convenience was always going to be a challenge for us. When we pivoted the company into, the new aluminum bottle, that is now opening up so many more channels that we never really, could play in. Convenience and gas are two of those large channels right now that we're heavily investing in. So while I wish I had the historical data that Pepsi does, we don't have that just yet in the channel because we're just now starting to play in GNC or in gas and convenience. But I was in Boise, Idaho last week with Albertsons, and they had a huge meeting and presentation talking about the impact of GLP-1s in grocery and retail and things like that, right? And obviously, part one of any business is control the controllables, making sure that you control the things that you can control. But
Mhm.
I also think when you're starting to see this shift in consumer behavior and even deeper focus on health and wellness, being on the right side of that kind of makes our path a little more smooth. Because, like I said, from day one launching St. James, that was always our differentiator. We were always going to be the healthiest, cleanest, truly better for you option in the market. And, it's just kind of aligning where consumer habits are continuing to grow.
I know that the move from Tetra Pak to aluminum bottles has made a big difference for the business. I wonder if you can kind of talk about the logic of starting where you did and then the logic of moving where you did.
So we launched in Tetra Pak basically because we wanted to be different. We wanted to stand out on shelf. So we believed a lot in the functionality of that package when we first came out. There aren't a lot of brands in Tetra Pak. Vita Coco, probably the biggest. And, it definitely helped kind of get us out there. Like I said, your point of differentiation is, you see it on the shelf, right? When you don't see a lot of Tetra Pak. And then I think a couple of things happened as we started to scale and we started to look 12, 18, 24 months down the road. We had to look at things like capacity, co-packer relationships, economies of scale with scaling, and those necessarily were not where they needed to be within that pack. On the flip side of it, and what was really the driving force around it was switching to aluminum not only would help on the cost of goods side for us as a business, but more importantly on the consumer experience, right? We heard from a lot of people that, the tea tastes great, but Tetra doesn't stay cold long enough. And obviously, if you're buying an iced tea, you want it to be nice, cold, and refreshing. Sustainability has always been a huge pillar of our business. And while, we were leaning into sustainability with the Tetra Pak, it being, 80% recycled paper, even our caps were made out of sugarcane, fully biodegradable. The municipalities of recycling have not caught up yet with what, let's just say, equipment is needed to make Tetra fully recyclable. So we wanted to look for another option, right? So when we really looked at consumer experience, not only the product staying colder for longer, but one of our biggest differentiators is making it resealable. We're the only iced tea in the world that's a resealable aluminum bottle. Most other products are in a can, and obviously that's true single serve, right? If you don't finish the bottle, you could put the cap back on and throw it in the fridge. So all of those kind of metrics and thoughts went into our decision. And hats off to our ops team because this was just an idea that we floated uh, in November and we launched aluminum in March or April of last year. So within about 4.5 months, we had a full redo of our supply chain. Everything from, obviously bottles, caps, co-packers, all of that. So we made it happen really quick. And that has been the single largest impact. It's had the single largest impact on our business. Our velocities essentially tripled overnight. It also gave us the ability to kind of, introduce a brand refresh, some brighter colors, shapes, logos, and we feel really, really aligns well with our premium positioning of the product. And the bottle just looks, incredible on the shelf.
All right. So what would you consider to be your biggest marketing problem day to day?
Marketing problem day to day.
Put a challenge, how's that? Not problem.
Yeah, I think it's, attention and awareness. There are so many incredible brands out there trying to do exactly what we're doing. And, I always say that our competitors are not necessarily other iced tea companies. We're all fighting for share of stomach, right? So whether there's iced tea or CSD or a protein or a smoothie, we're all kind of going after a similar use occasion. So one of our challenges, I would say, is continuing to drive those core connectivity functions with our consumers as we kind of continue to grow and move into new markets, move into new channels, things that we discussed previously. Our strategy with St. James from day one has always been focus on the brand. Distribution and sales will come so that when we do get on the shelf, we've got a customer or consumer ready to go. And we introduced St. James at a Coachella activation, 3 years ago, right? So we've always been very, very brand heavy and really focus on that connectivity through experiential, through sampling, through influencers. And I think it's worked really, really well for us because, like I said, once the sales and distribution caught up, we had someone ready to go. So obviously, we're continuing to scale. And then as we move into new markets all around the country, it's finding out the right people, places, and things to partner with to continue on that connectivity. We know in LA, New York, Miami, Colorado, Seattle, those are some of our OG markets, you could say. But now that we are going into, Chicago, Albuquerque, St. Louis, all around the country, it's really finding those points of focus for us so that we can continue to build the community that we have in a real way.
I hear a real partner heavy approach for you guys. I know you've done a lot of collaborations, White Lotus, and on from there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of why these things have been successful for you and what you've learned doing it. Have there been some that have not been successful? It might be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we talk about competition both on the shelf and on the internet, right?
Mhm.
Everyone is fighting for that attention, and I think if you ever have an opportunity to help bring additional eyes or make a potential consumer take a second look at your product, it's an opportunity you should go after, right? So we learned early on that we have the ability to engage in some of these partnerships and collaborations, and there have been growing pains throughout that process, right? Sometimes you think a partnership is going to be cool and fun and should just live on Amazon. Where we've kind of shifted now is, and we take a similar approach, to be honest, with all of our events and activations as well. If we can't build a 360 plan around it, we're not going to engage in it. So, the White Lotus has been an incredible collaboration. It's one of the most watched shows in TV history. And that was an incredible asset and IP that we were able to get with, HBO Max and Warner Brothers. But we also built a really strong 360 plan around it. We had viewing parties in multiple cities. We had billboards around the country. We had different events that, were White Lotus themed. We sent out White Lotus mailers. And then obviously all culminating in the custom bottle that we launched nationwide in Target, right? So it's the focus, it's making sure that you have a home for some of these collaborations. But what it really comes down to is anything you can do to get extra eyeballs on your product. Maybe they found us because of White Lotus and now they buy us every week because they tried pineapple mango, at another event. So collaborations have been a big part of our strategy. I think in some sense, we're trying to make sure that we're not doing too many of those and remember that we have such a strong brand on its own that we can rely on, our portfolio and do that as well. And I think that's been seen most recently with our launch of Half and Half, which is a new SKU that we launched earlier this summer. And the campaign and activations and feedback and sales behind that SKU have been incredible, right? So it's really showing our team that we have the infrastructure to do this on our own, but also when the right partnerships make sense, making sure that we're activating. So yeah, White Lotus was huge. Juicy Couture was huge. We took over Times Square in New York City to announce that partnership, which was really exciting. And then again, a steady mix of, influencers, social, mailers, out of home, but most importantly, making sure that it's actually available through the omni-channel and all of our, different options to buy the product.
So, have you thought about hiring a CMO or engaging creative agency on a regular basis? When will you know that's the right time to do that?
It's a great question. Our business moves at 200 miles an hour every day. I say this all the time. About a year and a half ago, we only had 9 or 10 full-time employees. I think right now we're at 63. So, the company and brand are growing. A company our size typically wouldn't have a marketing team of 15 people full-time, but we do. And our marketing team has actually been quite large from day one. We did just recently hire a VP of marketing. For a long time, we didn't really have someone captaining the ship, if you will. And, we brought Amanda Stein over from Fever Tree. She was, I think, employee number 3 and the VP of marketing over there. And she's been incredible at, kind of adding the structure and direction across all outlets of our marketing channel. In terms of actually building out the C-suite, I think if and when that's necessary, we'll look at it. We don't have a direct calendar where we think we have to build out, a full C-suite, et cetera. We do things a little differently. Early on, we started with agency help. And then as we got a little more mature as a brand, we brought everything in-house. So we have 4 full-time graphic designers on our marketing team. We do everything in-house currently. And that's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of is building out the creative side and the creative arm of St. James. Everything that you see on social, website, email, that's all done in-house. And a lot of that is, the brainchild of our creative director. So similarly, about a year ago, we needed to help someone. We had to find someone to help with this brand refresh, and we decided to look outside of beverage for that. So she was a creative director at Love Shack Fancy for almost a decade, and she really brought that, different set of eyes from another industry and helped elevate our brand to a whole new level.
We're running out of time here, Brad, but I want to, one last question that we ask most of our guests here. Is there a marketing leader out there that you admire? And if you were able to meet with them, what would you ask of them?
I'm going to say someone who's just top of mind right now for me. Greg LaVecchia is the CEO or co-CEO of Bloom Energy, Bloom Pop Soda Supplements. I think what he's done with his brand in such a short amount of time is incredible. A lot of stuff that they do, we try and emulate. And that's, someone on the marketing side that we kind of look up to. If I had one question for Greg, I think it would kind of be similar to some of the discussions that we had earlier in terms of, he's had massive, massive scale. I see him every day. He's posting the counter. He's about to sell 500 million cans of his new product. So I think, the question would really be as you continue to grow and scale at such massive levels, how do you find the way to really be authentic to kind of local markets and then larger markets at the same time without alienating the other? We always talk about, not focusing on the coast, but focusing on the consumer, not necessarily geographically where they are. But when you get a product like that is, loved by everyone, everywhere on every channel, that's a big challenge. So that's something I'd love to have a lunch over and learn from him about.
There's a lot to learn about in the beverage industry. There are thousands of entrepreneurs out there, I know, and you've led some of them. So, Brad, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the time, John. It was great. Appreciate it.
That was Brad Neumann, CEO of St. James Tea, and I'm John Springer, senior reporter at Ad Age. I'd like to thank our producer, Lauren Ciardio, and remind you that you can subscribe to The Marketer's Brief wherever you get your podcasts. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.